Michael Vick to Norfolk State is a done deal. So let's go ahead and do what everybody wants to do. Compare him to other NFL players turned HBCU head coaches. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics. Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter or X at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by the College Football Playoffs. The college football playoff is here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. The college football playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round matchups December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. We'll wrap up today's episode with a look at another potential NFL player that could be an HBCU head coach. Many people aren't talking about this guy, but I believe this should be the topic of conversation. In segment 2, we'll take a look at why Norfolk State is a perfect place for Michael Vick, and most importantly, while Michael Vick is a perfect coach for Norfolk State at this moment. But I want to kick it off with a question that honestly is inevitable. It's one that's going to be asked. Is Michael Vick the next Deion Sanders? Is Michael Vick the next Eddie George? And on an even smaller note, is Michael Vick the next Eddie Robinson Jr.? See, the reason that I ask these questions is because all three of these men are former NFL players turned HBCU head coaches. Robinson Jr. at Alabama State, Tennessee State employs at this current time. Right now, they are still employing Eddie George. I know there's been conversations on if he would move and what he would do and all of these things. But then also, and lastly, Jackson State and Deion Sanders. We know how that has gone. Michael Vick is the newest Norfolk State head coach. And I love this hire because it's not as if Norfolk State is this super attractive job. And listen, I'm going to say that a couple of times today, but it's not to put them down. It's to really speak about why this is a big deal. I don't want to make it sound like charity. I don't want to make it sound like he's doing them a favor. It's the fact that Norfolk State is not a job that's like, hey, I just want to get a high profile gig, do this for a couple of years and get out of here. You can tell this is from Vick's heart. And the reason I can say that is because he's local. This is where he was raised. He's a Virginia kid. So if he was going to be anywhere in the HBCU landscape, Norfolk State is on a 5-team list. You're talking Morehouse, Clark, Virginia Union, Virginia State, Norfolk State. That's pretty much it. If we're talking Georgia from his Atlanta days, and then we're speaking about the state of Virginia from where he was raised. But the question becomes, is Michael Vick the next Deion Sanders, or is he the next Eddie George? Let's focus on those two. Because when you say it, is he the next Deion Sanders or Eddie George? You could put that as both of these guys are similar. I mean, they're star football players. They turned into HBCU head coaches. They have found success as head coaches. So you could say that. Is he the next Deion or Eddie George? But I prefer to say it in comparison. I don't prefer to say, is he like these two men? I mean to say, which one is he like? Is he the next Deion Sanders, or is he the next Eddie George? And it's interesting because they're two completely separate guys. On the field, we can talk about the fact that Deion Sanders had immediate success. Eddie George had to work there for a little bit. Now, when you're looking at Deion Sanders, we kind of don't reference the whole spring season. We don't reference the spring season because nobody talks about the spring season. But that COVID year, when you played in the spring 21 season for football, Deion took a little second to get his feet underneath him. Then when he got to the fall 21, oh, he hit it. And he took off immediately. So let's just choose to look at the fall because spring with COVID, weird anyway. You have immediate success versus a guy who had to kind of work his way up, honestly, figure these things out, figure it out. And I would say that they're looked at differently. I would say that to this day, Deion Sanders is still looked at primarily for his ability to recruit. I genuinely would say that he's such a large personality that who he is as a person will likely forever outweigh who he is as a coach. Meanwhile, with Eddie George, he's a much more reserved attitude guy. He's a much more reserved personality. I would say that his coaching is the thing that stands out. No one really talks about him as a person. Which one will Michael Vick be? Now, I believe that the path that you take once you get to this university is completely undecided. I don't know what it's going to be. It's too difficult to predict because he still has to come up with a staff. And he explained that he wants to have a staff that is experienced. So he understands the value of a staff. Until he does that, I can't tell you, is he going to have instant success? Is it going to take a second? That is still to be determined. But what I can say is, which guy is he more like? Is he more like Eddie George or is he more like Deion Sanders as he steps into Norfolk State University? I would say he's more Deion Sanders because when you think of why this is a great hire, and it's something that we'll talk about in segment 2, you think about the fact that he's an icon. He's Madden 04. He's a video game at quarterback. When you think about Michael Vick, this is actually a perfect partnership. HBCUs and Michael Vick, because Vick is one of the 3 to 5 first names that you're going to list when you're talking about black quarterbacks over the course of history. He's one of the first 3 to 5, and he may be the first guy that you name, depending on who you're talking to. He's one of them. I'm speaking Cam for the newer generation, Cam, Lamar, Vick. Now, you can go back to Doug Williams. You can go back to Randall Cunningham. You can get some Donovan McNabb in there, right? Like, you can have different conversations about different guys, but that's 6 people that I named. I would say Michael Vick is probably in that top 3 to 5 as far as people that you will discuss. So that notoriety is really the selling factor in bringing in Michael Vick. That's what it is. It's not professional experience. It's not I think Eddie George was looked at in a different way. Deion was looked at as this charismatic guy who can bring people in. And quite frankly, I believe that Michael Vick will get people to flock to Norfolk State in a similar, not same, but similar fashion that Deion Sanders was able to get them to flock to Jackson State. But then the question for me becomes, are you going to go get your Travis Hunter? And by that, I don't mean the number 1 prospect in the nation. That happened one time, and that's difficult. There are top 5 programs who don't do that quickly, right? Like, let's just be very clear. To get a top flight, number 1 overall recruit to an FCS is difficult. To get the number 1 quarterback is difficult. So when I say, are you going to get your Travis Hunter? I wonder if Michael Vick is going to go and get a quarterback that resembles himself, because that's what Hunter really represents to me. Yes, he represents one of the greatest, or if not the best recruit to ever come to an HBCU out of high school. We're talking about ranking wise. But what he really represents to me is Deion's football child. He looked up to Deion so much to the point that he wanted to go to a different university, to the alma mater of Deion. Like, these things matter. These things hold weight. Is Michael Vick going to go find the kid who's a dual threat quarterback and emulates Vick, and he's just like, oh, I can show you the ropes? Deion Sanders had Travis Hunter. He was the guy who is like baby Deion. Does Vick go get baby Michael Vick? Things I want to know. Then as far as Eddie George goes, you have the connection of local, because George played for the Tennessee Titans. Of course, that was his connection to Tennessee State. But then you have Michael Vick, who was raised in Virginia. He is that guy. Everything, when you have people who are national icons, you can only imagine how much bigger they are in their home city, home state. I can't tell you. but I can only imagine that that's going to be the factor. He didn't have any coaching experience either. Walked in with zero, just like Michael Vick does. Okay, cool. Then I want to throw one more name in there, Eddie Robinson Jr. Eddie Robinson Jr., he wasn't a star like the other three men that we're speaking about. But at the same time, he was a former NFL player, and he was a starter. He was a starting NFL player who had a career. This is a player who stayed connected to the game of football. Eddie George went away. Deion Sanders kept coaching or went into coaching. Eddie Robinson went into the media, and that's a different conversation, but that's what Vick did. He stayed connected by being an analyst. He wasn't a broadcaster like Eddie Robinson Jr., but he was in the sports media world as an analyst. So when I'm really looking at Michael Vick, who knows what his path is going to be after he starts his head coaching tenure at Norfolk State University. But as he steps into being the Spartans head coach, he's kind of a combination of all the prominent NFL players turned HBCU head coaches. He has that name notoriety. He has that gravity in the pool for younger players that Deion Sanders had at Jackson State. He has the ties to the local area that Eddie George had at Tennessee State. And then with Eddie Robinson, the way that Vick stayed connected to the game of football is as a media member, very similar to Eddie Robinson Jr. So when you look at the three most prominent examples of NFL players turned HBCU athletes, Michael Vick has pieces of every single one of their stories as they entered their head coaching tenure at an HBCU. What's going to be his path as he walks out and goes through? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Now, as we push forward, I want to take a look at why this was a perfect hire for Norfolk State. It's exactly what I believe they needed, and we'll look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. When I'm looking at FanDuel, take advantage of the college football playoffs. Take advantage of the NFL season. Take advantage of the NBA and college basketball season. I feel like, and it's not overly shocking, but college basketball is so under discussed right now. You barely hear it. Go check out Locked On Cougs. My guy Parker does phenomenal work for UH, and they're one of the better teams on a year in and year out basis. Make some money on that. Go listen to Parker. He'll tell you how to make money on UH. So college basketball, NBA, college football playoffs. The NFL regular season is about to come to the close and start their playoffs. It's up to you. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com. And if you're new to FanDuel, you get $150 back in bonus bets. You'll get $150 back in bonus bets if you put down a $5 winning bet. Go to FanDuel.com and make every moment more. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. And here's the thing about Prize Picks. It gets so crucial that you will see people who literally start group chats just to make sure that their Prize Picks hit. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions. That's a B, billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least two players with a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. It's Pickmas, which means that Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December and $30+ million. So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Spencer McLaughlin as we get closer to the college football playoffs. It's bigger, it's better, it's more expanded. You're going to need to be educated on that by my guy, Spencer McLaughlin. So that being said, I want to keep it rolling because our season is over, but gosh, it feels like football is not slowing down anytime soon. This was a great hire for Norfolk State. And I want to make sure that I emphasize the critical part in there is for Norfolk State University. The reason it's for them specifically is because of where they are as an institution, or excuse me, not even institution, right? Because they're actually looked at fondly. They've been ranked a top third HBCU for multiple years. You've seen it in 2022. I think they were top 20. I think 2024, 23, they were top 25. So you're looking at a university that is respected. But if you're athletic, if you're just looking at the athletics, specifically football, not so much. I love this pick because what do they have to lose? If he flames out at Norfolk State, no one's saying anything about Norfolk State. They're at a place where they could take the risk. If you want to look at it as there being a risk, right? Because I think they have a pretty good track record in this department. But the reason I say for Norfolk State is because I was supposed to have this episode be about coaching vacancies. I'm going to push that over to Friday. But I was supposed to have this episode about coaching vacancies today. And I was going to rank Norfolk State pretty low because I think they needed a specific type of coach. The specific type of coach I felt they needed was a head coach with superstar power, i.e. a NFL player. They got this in Vick. Or a head coach who is super experienced, has a good name, and demands and commands respect. They got the former. They got the NFL player. They got the star power. You need something to jumpstart this school. You need something to jumpstart this team because the way that they're looked at athletically is likely connected, at least a little bit, connected to how they play football. Because that's every school. I believe that TSU, this is my personal belief, I believe that TSU is the best men's basketball team over the last decade. That's just how I feel in the HBCU landscape. I just feel like they've done enough. But I already know how TSU is looked at athletically is based on how they play football. Maybe in the state of Virginia, it's a little bit different. I don't know. I know that in Texas, football is more than just king. I feel like football is king in America. Certain places it's not. But in general, it's king. In football, it means even more. That's what they do. But at the end of the day, you're looking at a school that needed some sort of spark, and Michael Vick has provided that. Norfolk State University needed a spark on the football field, and I think it needed to come in the form of leadership. That's exactly what they provided. They saw, we want Michael Vick. We think that he's a good guy to lead our program. He's from Virginia. I expect him to have that on lock. I expect him to bring in a good quarterback. And the thing about bringing in a good quarterback is it changes everything. A good quarterback changes everything that you do. It changes everything that you're able to do. It changes how you perform. Most times when you have a really good quarterback, you're going to be a competitive team. Norfolk State doesn't have the ability to say, hey, look at what we did in 2016. We just trying to get back there. Come help us. They don't have the opportunity to say, hey, you see this 4-year span. They haven't been that good. They can't rely on history on the FCS level. They can't rely on recent trends on the FCS level. What is the selling point of Norfolk State? If you would have asked me 48 hours ago, I would have struggled to have an answer for you. But because I'm sitting here now with Michael Vick as the head coach of Norfolk State, I know what the selling point is. It's 7. It's Michael Vick. That's the selling point. And when your head coach is your selling point, you have a pretty good chance. That's my opinion. People are going to want to come play for him. When I speak about the athletic profile being defined by football, let's be very clear. I know that Norfolk State has a good basketball team, men and women. They've been successful. Women have the most star power out. Right. It's funny because I said this about UAPB last year when they had Zay Green and they had Star Jacobs. There was a lot of star power on that team. No pun intended. Now you're looking at Norfolk State, and unlike them, they're not going to break up. Kiera Wheeler and Diamond Johnson are here. You have the 2 leading candidates for MEAC Player of the Year. You have Larry Vickers. Shout out Vick and Vickers. Got to get that picture at some point. That They are a top mid-major when you're ranking them nationally. So they have a really huge platform in women's basketball. Unfortunately, people judge a school by what they do in football and men's basketball. Those are the two sports. Everything else is just cherries on top, and it's about how many cherries can you stack. But we don't really have that conversation often. It is basketball, men's basketball, and football. That's how a program is judged, especially on the HBCU level when it's hard to get a great level of shine, right? Like Iowa with Caitlin Clark. I don't know what the heck they do at Iowa. I know they got white cornerbacks. That's what I know they have. And then they have the women's basketball team. That firestorm was enough to define that program. But you look at another school, that's not the case. I think LSU's women's basketball team, if they didn't have so many other things going on for them, perfect example. LSU's women's basketball team is a great enough media firestorm to where it makes up for the men's basketball team not being great. So you got football in one of the more attention grabbing women's basketball teams out, and they just had a ring recently. So you have that. Occasionally it can happen. I'm not saying never, but it's only on occasion. And the HBCUs, I don't think the media attention exists enough for women's basketball to be a top two or defining sport at a university. Michael Vick can change and reshape how this is looked at because it is based on football and men's basketball and football more than the basketball side. Michael Vick is going to be a main attraction and people are going to flock to the Spartans. Now, as we wrap up today's episode, I have one more guy that I want to name. He's not connected to Norfolk State. If Vick does what he needs to do, he won't be connected to Norfolk State. And if Vick doesn't do what he needs to do, he probably still won't be connected. But why are we tiptoeing around the man's name? It's Teddy Bridgewater, state champion in Florida, by the way. Let's break down why he should be a name you should watch in the coaching circles as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by the college football playoffs. Now, here's my thing. It's that time of the season that everybody's looking forward to. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever. Bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We've taken a look at Norfolk State's decision to hire Michael Vick. We've looked at the expectations, the questions, which coach is he going to be the most like? I'm leaning towards Deion as a person, probably Eddie George as a trajectory after being hired. We'll get into that as time goes on, of course. But if there's going to be another HBCU head coach who came from the NFL ranks as a player, who would it be? I think that Teddy Bridgewater is a name to watch. I wouldn't even say a name to watch. I would say it's a name that should happen if this were to continue. And I know there's people saying, why does it have to continue? This, that, and the third. This just, hear me out. Hear me out. I want to make it very clear. Teddy Bridgewater has coached football on the high school ranks. This year was his first and only year. He led his team to a state championship, and he would not be the first head coach to go from high school to FCS. That would not be a rarity. I think that the history and how you know him will make you look at it differently. But going from high school to FCS is not the craziest thing that we've ever heard of. So I want to make sure that is crystal clear on exactly where he stands. The reason I want to see him do this is because I believe he is a perfect fit for HBCUs. I say that Michael Vick is a perfect fit for Norfolk State, but I think if we're talking one size fit all, That's Teddy B. I seen him as a player for the Saints, riding through the city on his bike. I seen him go back to the high school ranks in Miami. I seen him before he was a head coach be on a sideline. I don't know if it was his alma mater or what. It probably was. And he's dancing with the dance team. These things are funny. These things are cool. And outside of the coaching, you probably feel like, what does that actually have to do with anything? Nothing, right? But here's the deal. I use dancing with the dance team. I use riding his bike through the city of New Orleans. I use going back to high school in Miami to be a coach to all paint the picture of how important that community is to Teddy Bridgewater. From the outside looking in, it seems like he believes in ingratiating himself. It feels like he believes in diving in and being a part of the community, not just a member of a football team or a coach of a football team. He doesn't believe in just being a resident. He believes in family. And don't this sound like what we always say? Ain't this what we talk about? HBCU family, the connection. Don't this sound familiar? It can't just be to me. I can't be the only one who thinks that this sounds familiar. It lines up with the values that we have. If we're talking about players coming in from the NFL ranks and all of the things that they have, well, they might not understand the struggle. They might not really die. I can guarantee you, if Teddy Bridgewater steps onto an HBCU campus as a head coach, he understands what he's getting himself into and he understands how to operate. You can trust him. I don't know what caused more damage to the NFL to HBCU pipeline. The way Deion Sanders left, or the fact that Ed Reed's coaching career never got off his feet. I don't know what made it worse. But I do know that both of those events really, really shaped how people look at this. Teddy Bridgewater is not one of those guys from how it looks. And I love Ed, by the way. I just want to put that out there. I still do. In case I ever meet him, we can put a cigar in the air. I'm with you, Ed. All right. Some people just be part of your childhood. You can't shake that. But I do feel like Teddy Bridgewater is destined for an HBCU. If he decides he wants to go to the college ranks, this just makes sense. So keep that name in your memory bank. Put it in the back of your head, because he just recently announced that he's unretiring and going back to the NFL. I don't know if he's going to try to be a backup for a team that's going to the playoffs. If he's going to try to play next year, we'll see. But he's a Florida boy. He is. And it's important to remember, I don't think Bethune-Cookman is too solid. That job could be open next year. Wouldn't shock me if it was. Wouldn't shock me either way. Would not shock me either way. Why not Teddy B? Anyway, on tomorrow's episode, we'll look at the swinging tides of SWAC MEAC games, whether that's the challenge or the bowl. We'll break it both down on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.